I think one way to kind of frame or make sense of what this administration is doing is they're pulling on levers both within the country and out in the international system that will help focus more power in that White House and take it away from other actors and institutions.
Today we're honored to welcome Dr. John Owen, a leading political theorist and professor at the University of Virginia and the 2025 recipient of the Grawemeyer Award for Improving World Order. Dr. Owen's latest work, The Ecology of Nations, makes a powerful argument. Just as species engineer their ecosystems to survive, nations, particularly liberal democracies, must shape the international environment to sustain their values. But in an era of rising autocracy, fractured global norms, and internal division, can democracy still adapt? Can it endure? With a background that spans fellowships at Harvard, Stanford, and Princeton, and a career devoted to the ideas that bind or unravel world orders, Dr. John Owens brings a rare depth to the conversation about democracy's future, national identity, and the responsibility of powerful nations in a fragile world. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. John, as you told me I could call you.
Andre, if I may, thank you. I'm honored to be your guest here. I'm a big fan of what you do.
Thanks for joining us. Maybe you can just speak briefly a little bit about, how you're looking at this current administration. I mean, your job is looking at geopolitics inside and outside of countries. And so maybe you can just start with your assessment of the president and the administration.
Yes, good. Well, Andre, if I may, thank you. I'm honored to be your guest here. I'm a big fan of what you do. So I will not engage in any kind of partisan, screed here. I've got I'll be as analytical as I can. I've got opinions like anybody does, but I do think, the book you referenced is an attempt to link the fact that America is a democracy, a liberal democracy with certain institutions, free market system, to its position in the international system. And sometimes, really often, political scientists who study foreign policy separate those things. They say, on the one hand, you're a country like other countries, like China, like Russia, like Costa Rica. Countries are the same in a sense. On the other hand, you're a democracy. But that's a different realm of inquiry, right? It's got nothing to do with being a country in the world. And I don't think that's right. I think being a democracy or being an autocracy affects your place in the world, your foreign policy, how the world interacts with you. So the book's a lot about that, the back and forth. And as you say, I make this argument that the United States, by and large, really since World War II, has tried very hard to shape its international environment to support its democracy, to help it remain democratic. Because before World War II, the 1930s, Great Depression, rise of fascism, pretty bad. I wasn't around, but it was pretty bad. And it looked like democracy was really done. It was not a winning system. Fascism or maybe communism were the two stronger. That was a long time ago. Between then and now, lots has happened, including the United States and some of its democratic allies. Britain, for example, setting up a lot of rules and norms, institutions, putting a lot of information out there in the world that said, no, actually democracy is a great system. It's a winning system, and more countries should be democratic. So that's the kind of setup I would say. So usually an American president really believes what I've just said, that our system as it is now is not perfect. It needs work. We've improved it over time. We've made some mistakes over time. But by and large, this system that was set up in the 1780s is still working, and we cherish it, and we want to keep it going. And so we want to shape the world around us in a way that helps us keep it going, right? Through all these things I mentioned, international institutions, rules. Once in a while, though, you do get a leader whose devotion to the internal regime is not as clear. So, and I think, I'll go on a limb. I think President Trump, and he's got reasons. I don't doubt that he's a patriot, that he loves his country, but he's got a very different view of what's in the national interest. I'll put it as neutrally as I can. And I think this is a helpful way to think about what he's doing. Okay. He is concentrating more and more power in the White House,
in the executive branch.
Exact, but even within the executive branch, he's taking power away from some of the bureaus and departments, Treasury, Commerce, Pentagon, Intelligence, and focusing it in the Oval Office, so that he and his inner circle be making decisions, right? And he's done this in a number of ways, and I can go over some of those. But this is one of the most, frankly, interesting things we haven't done. I mean, most presidents get frustrated with the bureaucracy. They're the head of the executive branch, and they get annoyed. The Navy won't do this, or the IRS, or whatever. This vast set of, you go to Washington, D.C., you see all these big buildings and all these people in them, and the president can't just have his way. But President Trump is doing something about it. He put loyalists in cabinet positions running these things. Elon Musk and Doge has fired or furloughed thousands and thousands of people. And all of this is to decrease the constraints on his decision-making. He's also trying to get power from Congress, turn that over to the White House, from the courts, actually from the private sector, from nonprofits. So I'm sitting at a University of Virginia, and what's going on at Columbia and Harvard and so on. I think that's about universities more generally. It's not just about Harvard, it's about universities. The corporate sector. So it's really an effort to, and you can support it or oppose it. So, but I think that's what he's doing now. As I said a minute ago, since World War II, the United States has tried to mold the international environment to keep our system in place. I think President Trump, again, doesn't have that goal. So if I were if I was trying to concentrate more power in the White House, change our institutions, I would not just do what he's done with Doge, with the cabinet appointments, with the courts, bullying judges and so on. I would also be doing some things in the international realm, and he's doing some of those. So one of those is tariffs, surprise and very high tariffs, catching even allies off guard, and then rescinding the tariffs and then putting them back on, and so on, keeping everybody off balance. Why does this matter if your goal is to focus power in the White House? Well, one reason why is one of the big international props to American democracy has been the international trading system that we set up after World War II, where the United States set up a multilateral institution that is designed to bring down barriers to international trade. And we did this out of our own national interest. This wasn't because it was a nice thing to do. It was because it was cold, hard interest.
Yeah.
Right? So another thing we've done since World War II is selectively, or I have to say selectively, but truly, genuinely supported democracy in other countries. And we favored fellow democracies, especially in rich countries, but increasingly in middle income and poor countries as well. So NATO, the NATO alliance, the alliance with Japan, considering Canada, we in Canada always have little tiffs, but get along really well. Another thing you would do if you're trying to change our regime inside the United States, to weaken the separation of powers and focus more power in the White House, is you support democracy overseas less. And you do things like, to NATO countries, we're not so sure about NATO. We think you guys have been ripping us off. We might just let you go on your own. Ukraine is a struggling, very imperfect democracy, but an aspiring democracy, fighting for its life against an authoritarian giant neighbor, Russia. If you don't care so much about democracy at all, you're going to treat Ukraine differently, right? You're going to play hardball with Ukraine, and you might actually tilt a little bit toward Russia. Yeah. So those things are happening and more. So I think one way to kind of frame or make sense of what this administration is doing is they're pulling on levers both within the country and out in the international system that will help focus more power in that White House and take it away from other actors and institutions.
I see. And so there's a connection between the foreign actions that we're seeing and the consolidation of power, not just within the executive branch, but specifically within the White House. And sort of, like you say, some people are on the side of, to some degree, of like, there's a deep state, there's a permanent swamp. We have to get rid of these tentacles that, limit the power of the president within the executive branch. But then there's also these extensions off into other branches, and even things like tariffs that gives the, which, should be in part, if it's a tax on the citizens, an act of Congress. But instead it's something that's coming from the president, from the White House specifically. I wanted to get into, recently you had said that one thing you'd be looking out for in the next few months, and this was maybe 2 months ago, would be how the president and the White House responds to things that come out of the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court's actions are. Are they following what the Supreme Court is saying? How are they, jousting with power with the Supreme Court and the word that they give down? How do you feel like, that's been going in the last few weeks? I know there was a recent judgment that just came out on immigration. What do you feel about that relationship, and how this administration has been treating it so far? And, will that, the importance, I think, of that relationship as well for the value of our institutions. And we can talk more about what that means for the value of the dollar, right? And this uncertainty on the nation state. It's like, it's not just a, vacuum or a, abstract, ideals. These are things that impact the value of the dollar, the trust that people have in our institutions. And so they're very important things, not just sort of abstract intellectual ideas.
Yeah, agree completely. I study international relations, foreign policy. So it sometimes surprises people when they ask me, what are you looking at? What's the key thing to keep your eye on right now in the United States? And they think I'm Russia or China or Iran. All those things matter. But I really think the rule of law is the bottom line here. And by which I mean, there's an old phrase about our system. It's not just about our system. It's other, what we call liberal democracies where the people rule, but there are constraints based on individual rights. We've got a Bill of Rights. We've got a constitution separating powers, etc. The rule of law says that we are fundamentally a government of laws, not of men or of people. And again, wait a minute, we're a democracy. But what it means is that the individual leader or a clique of leaders just can't do whatever they want. They really are constrained by our Constitution, which is something we've had since 1787, and we have amended, we've reinterpreted a number of times, but it's just there. So when the president, and since the early 19th century, we've had this practice, judicial review, where the Supreme Court is the chief interpreter of the Constitution, has the final say on what a particular law means and whether a law passed by Congress or an executive order by the president is constitutional, fits in with the Constitution. If a president disagrees, tough, right? This president has made very clear he doesn't respect at least certain judges, and we're waiting to see if that extends to the judiciary itself and the whole practice of judicial review, which again we've had for more than 200 years. Or if it's just about particular judges, or if it's President Trump driving, he drives a hard bargain. He's from Queens. He's from, he knows how to play hardball, right? You probably want a guy like that in power.
Yeah, the art of war, the art of the deal. The tariffs. Look at how it worked out.
Exactly.
Okay.
So some people think, no, that's all that's going on. And when it comes down to it, he will surely, if the Supreme Court speaks definitively, he will, he'll obey. But up until that point where it's really obvious, the Supreme Court has said, no, A, not B. Up to that point, he'll look for ambiguity because he's a bargainer, right? He wants to get the best deal. And his supporters say, that's the guy you want in power. You don't want a wimp. You don't want somebody who's going to give in too quickly. But others are worried that there are a lot of signs that this is an administration that doesn't respect the courts and is slowly undermining them and is waiting for an opportunity to defy. So on the immigration case, I'm paying attention to the Abrejo Garcia down in El Salvador. I take that really quite seriously. I think when the administration admitted it was a mistake, that should have been the end of it, and we got to bring the guy back. But it's not happening. I'm not sure it will happen. This is a pretty bad prison, but it's not really about him and his right to be in the United States. It's not even about how bad the prison in El Salvador is. It's really about due process. The man, not a citizen, but was denied due process, and the it looks like the administration's not ready to make that right. So I've got my eye on that, like a lot of people do, and I'm worried about it. But I'm not quite ready to say this is an open defiance and we're in a deep crisis. But stay tuned, right?
Yeah. There were two. And sorry, I'm a little vague on these instances, but they just came to mind. I was doing a constitutional course like a couple months ago on like Coursera or something, and just trying to get up on the Constitution. They were talking about the separation of powers and talking about these examples. I think one had to do with school integration, and maybe one had to do with president fighting against the oil companies. Anyway, in those cases, I think the first case, the Supreme Court did a ruling and the president just flat ignored it, right? The Supreme Court's power wasn't as powerful as it is today when the country was just getting started. And over time, it really gained this reputation that it has today. Yeah. And even in the cases, a more modern case where it does have more power, eventually the Congress coming in has to really, you need two of the three really to box in the other one if the one's going awry, especially if the executive branch's job is to kind of, go out there in the world and be a little bit more, action oriented versus reactionary, right? So
that's true. So we can look to history, and I there's a lot of alarmism, and some mornings I wake up and I'm pretty alarmed. But we have this history of tussling, tug of war among the three branches of government and within the executive branch, as you and I have been talking about. Andrew Jackson, who's a kind of a hero of President Trump, didn't think much of the Supreme Court and defied them. We still, the Republic survived. Franklin Roosevelt, right? So a lot of President Trump's critics would think very highly of Franklin Roosevelt. But, you look back at that history, he tried to pack the Supreme Court. He wanted to, they were defying him on some of his New Deal measures in the early 30s. And so he said, well, fine, I'm going to just pack the court with my guys. So he wanted to put 4 extra justices on the court, bring it to 13 so we'd have a majority. And Congress, including Democrats in Congress, said, well, time out. No, that's out of bounds. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And Roosevelt first said, well, why not? But he backed down. He didn't do it. Yeah. So we've had moments, right? I'm not saying every president up till now has been a pious follower of judicial review and separation of power. No, a lot of them want to test it. Somebody like Jackson or somebody like Franklin Roosevelt, like Trump, had big ideas for the presidency. Right. We got to get this country moving again. It's in the hands of these elites. Jackson and Roosevelt will both say that in the hands of these elites who are not following the interests of average people. So it's time for me to just, take the steering wheel here and take it from. And they overdid it, and eventually, after some struggle and maybe some crises, you could say, the ship was righted. I'm mixing metaphors here, but and we've survived, and so I'm hopeful. I am really quite serious about this. That our institutions have lasted for a long time. They've lasted some tests before, and I'm hopeful if we are undergoing now or soon to undergo some severe tests that will survive. But these are not easy things, right? You can't just sit back and let it and think, oh, we'll be fine. We're always fine.
Right.
Surviving involves, first of all, what you and I are doing here, like talking openly about what's going on. Hopefully some people are going to watch and get interested and draw encouragement and get some ideas and disagree. That's great too. But write, and if it comes to protesting, certainly voting, campaigning, there are all kinds of things we can do in this country. And that's how we've gotten through crises in the past.
Yeah, and it seems like, what doesn't kill you make you stronger. And so, these tests of these institutions awaken people. I think, Europe has been suddenly awakened by Donald Trump and sort of they realize they don't have the military might that they should have been fortifying for themselves, maybe just like the Finnish or some of them, but very few. And they're like, wait a minute, we have no military capability. What are we doing? Leaving it into the hands of someone else. You see maybe Russia being able to, this war with Ukraine has made its military production capability increase, right? And it's been forced to look at that. And so maybe Canada is starting to, whoa, wait a minute. What do we do? Let's start thinking about these sort of things and our own sort of, so you sort of get that independence or you get that test and it starts to make you stronger. Not that it's good to make our allies stronger against us. Probably that's a whole geopolitical conversation, I think, to be had. But I think it is interesting, like you say, with these tests, with these presidents testing the system, how it makes individuals want to, oh, wait a minute, what's going on? Let me study this. Let me get into that. It's time to be ignited instead of being lulled to sleep. And so I think that's exciting.
Right. Yeah, I think every U.S. president since the 1960s has complained about the European low contributions to the common defense, right? The economists call this free riding. You're going to get the benefit no matter what, so you're kind of tempted to underpay. Yeah. And Uncle Sam's going to pay for this anyway, so why not? And it's been a special problem since the 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. Some Europeans weren't sure we needed NATO at all, but most of them really began to underpay. And Bill Clinton and George Bush and Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they all complain about this. So a silver line, if you're against President Trump or you're fundamentally, don't like what he's doing, most people say there's a silver lining here, which is the wake-up call to Europe, as you say, Andre, Japan as well, and Canada. I have Canadian relatives, and some of them have said all along, we Canadians do need to pony up and pay more, but politically it's a hard sell, right?
Right.
So you can have defense strategists get together and say, absolutely, we need to upgrade, we need to either buy more hardware from the United States or develop our own. We need to increase the number of personnel in our Air Force and our Navy or our Army. And because, first of all, the Americans may at some point cut us off. But second, it makes us too dependent on the Americans. It lets them kind of push us around a little bit, right? Because they know we're not really providing. And yet when it comes down to budgeting, politicians, unless there's a real crisis, they're going to say, yeah, I agree with you, but let's do that next year. This year we got these other problems to solve. Year after year, all of these allied countries have done this. And now they realize they can't do that anymore. And I think that's good for them. It's good for the world. Actually, you're right. It means there are going to be some outcomes. Let's assume NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is if it doesn't go away, then it doesn't mean as much as it used to, and the Europeans are not going to rely on it as much. That means they're going to defy us in some ways we're not used to. We're not going to like that, but it's a price worth paying. I think World War II ended 80 years ago. It is a little strange that we are covering the defense of, say, Germany, a very wealthy country, Japan, a very wealthy country. Yeah. It's a little strange, historically a little odd.
Yeah, it's just an anomaly historically, huh?
Everybody, yeah, exactly. It's very unusual historically. Everybody knows it. And if that's coming to an end, it's maybe not the worst thing.
Yeah, I mean, for Germans as well, right? You don't want some change in America with the way we change every 4 years to suddenly drop on a dime and leave you with no defenses. And it's like, well, why wouldn't I build my own defense? And so that actually sort of transitions and bridges into the one of your main ideas, a big idea from your recent book and your work. It had me thinking about this sort of rugged individualism, or this like creating yourself, your own self-image, and sort of that gets reversed into something that's more on the personal level, on the individual level in your work, where it says, well, you need to strip your community. You need to go out and make something of yourself, self-made, or there's a term I'm losing now, but that's a big part of the.
Yeah. I talk about liberalism, which is a doctrine, and I don't mean Democratic Party. I mean
Right.
small L liberalism, the devotion to personal liberty, the idea that personal freedom is the highest political good. That's really that's our bottom line. And that's been the American creed for most Americans and most political parties and politicians, most, not all, since the founding. We have interpreted what that means differently over the decades, over the centuries. And we started out with what a lot of us call classical liberalism, and then we moved into, in the early 20th century, to welfare liberalism, which entails some different sorts of policies. And then in the late 70s, 80s, we began to move into what I call open liberalism, which is what you've just been describing, the idea that, well, personal freedom, and what I'm about to say may sound completely, it's going to probably sound completely normal to most people, but it would not have sounded normal 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Personal freedom means creating myself. I get to decide who I am. Part of being an adult, a free adult, is I create my own values, and I might embrace the values I was raised with, but I only do it. I'm only free if I decide to do that myself, and my identity and where I live and so on. And this sounds really congenial. I'm a modern person too, but it's kind of new, and it comes with a set of laws and policies that I think I argue haven't been great for everybody. It comes with a certain cultural view and a certain set of economic policies that really are about lowering barriers, opening national economies to completely free movements of goods and services and capital and people. Any kind of barrier we've inherited from the past has to go, or at least is very suspect. Again, because they stand into the way of our personal freedom. And culturally, this really goes against the values of small town. A lot of communities, immigrant communities, small town communities, rural communities, they tend to like a lot of what they have and cherish it, and don't like this, this Silicon Valley slogan, "Move fast and break things."
Yeah.
All right, that works pretty well in Silicon Valley. It does not work in huge parts of the United States or other countries as well. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The liberalism we have really almost forces this on us. You've got to be ready to change careers, to move, abandon your community several times during your lifetime. Right. And we think that's the good life, to have that kind of fluidity. And I'm saying, well, not for everybody. And it's created a lot of communities have been left behind. So we have a lot of misery in parts of the country. The life chances for people in big parts of the country are not what they ought to be. And this is true again.
Life chances in like careers? What do you mean life chances?
Yeah, careers. Yeah, exactly. And this is true in a lot of other democracies as well. They're having similar problems at the same time. A lot of European democracies, right? And this is where you get the polarization, why a lot of Americans really regard the other party as the enemy, a more dangerous enemy than, say, a foreign enemy. And polarization makes a country really vulnerable to authoritarianism, because if you believe there's a strong enemy within that's the other side, and a politician comes along and says, well, you know what, I can take care of that. I agree. They're the enemy, and we're going to take care of it for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're more apt to listen to that politician and support his or her party, but because they're going to take care of the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So you're finding this in European politics as well. It's not a coincidence. It's happening to a lot of us at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a big part of our problem. And so what I call for in the book is if open liberalism works for you, if you work in Silicon Valley or an investment bank, and this is working, I'm a university professor. I'm kind of in this demographic as well, right? Fine. But what I don't think has helped is to have our institutions and norms and, what we value, even down to our entertainment, the art, validating this kind of life and devaluing, I'll call it a more traditional life, where you're born in a community, you stay there, your extended family really matters and you have obligations to them. You're just not going to defy because they're your family. That kind of lifestyle. It really is hard to maintain that in our society, and it hasn't.
Oh my goodness!
It has not helped. It hasn't helped our politics, I think.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. I mean, in my own personal life, I see that living in Detroit and sort of having this family, big family on my mom's side, 6, 7 siblings, and a big family. And then I'm also, I go to college and then I go work in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And sort of Hollywood might be one of the prime examples of this. Everyone's fleeting and flying away.
I wasn't going to say, but yeah.
and everybody's leaving. Everybody's leaving it behind, and that's the way to go. You leave your family behind. You forge your independence, and you create yourself. But then you leave. Not only do you leave all that behind, it's also that you don't bring a lot of that with you. You, like you said, it's the idea of defying that. It'd be one thing if even they were, creating the idea that we should bring these values into the new places that we arrive to. But instead it's a complete, ripping apart of those and saying that these are the ways that we should go. And I think it mirrors that sort of elitism that you talked about. And it's interesting that Andrew Jackson was even seeing this like elitism back in his day. I don't know what that looks like. And then you move forward and there's this idea coming again. And I think for me, it was interesting to think about how that separates us from a lot of what you hear is like, we're separated from the church. And as modern people, we're separated from that institution. I loved just getting a little bit into your work. I wish I had more time. The work you mentioned about one of the true underpinnings of democracy wasn't just the institutions at the federal level and the state level. It was bowling alleys. It was the Boy Scouts. Right. It was trade unions. These were the things that were sort of standing up citizens and making them upright so that they could then, be part of the democratic, the liberal process in a different way. And you really lose a lot of that when you, far away from home and detach yourself.
That's right. So this is what we call civil society. There's a French sociologist, political theorist from 200 years ago, almost, Alexis de Tocqueville, got this big fat book. I'm looking at it on my shelf, but I won't show.
Yeah, can I see
Democracy in America. Democracy. I highly. It's a long. Yeah. It's a commitment.
Okay.
It's a doorstopper book, but it's full of insight. And this is the 1830s. Right? It's Jacksonian America, in fact.
Okay.
And he's got many critiques of the United States. He is not a cheerleader. What he's trying to do is tell the French. So he believes he's a French aristocrat, and his grandfather was executed in the French Revolution, beheaded. So he's got a lot of reason to hate democracy, but he realized democracy's here, in France, and he wants to explain how it's going to be to his fellow French. So he comes to America, and he tours with a friend of his, and they talk to people, and they interview, they observe. And he says, one interesting thing about America I've not seen in Europe is you have these, Americans love to form associations, private associations. At one point he says, if there's a problem in a village, you live in a village in France, there's a problem, they send somebody to Paris, to the central government, to solve it for them. If you have a problem in England, they ask the local aristocrat, the lord, if he'll solve it for them. If there's a problem in the United States, the people just organize into a group and solve it themselves. And he says, I think this is part of what it is to be democracy. That's nothing to do directly with the government or voting or free press, but it's self-organization to solve problems. And it's usually local, not always, but usually. And he even says, I don't think they had bowling leagues in the 1830s, but the equivalent, church groups, volunteer groups, things that are about fun, also are about self-organizing to do things together. Mm-hmm. So more recently, some people, like there's a guy called Robert Putnam who wrote a book called Bowling Alone back in the 90s. And he said, one problem, he saw this problem back then. One problem with American democracy is we've weakened civil society. And the title Bowling Alone means people still bowl, but you don't have the bowling leagues you used to have. which seems like, so what? What does that have to do with
Right.
democracy? He goes, no, actually, believe it or not, bowling leagues are like a little school of democracy where you learn how to solve problems with other people without somebody coming in and telling you what to do. You figure it out yourself as a group, right? It's democratic. Yeah. That's a school of democracy. So I think Putnam was right. I think if anything, the problems gotten a bit worse since the 90s. And I'm going to go out on, maybe. Yeah. Thank you for anticipating. So you and I are doing a digital thing here, and I value that. It's great. I would never get to do this without the internet. And however, there's a cost, right? I think cell phones and social media, which can remove our incentives to do things or organize with people who are in our actual area, physically close to us, can actually damage civil society. A chat room, you and your followers on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, it's a kind of community. It's not the same. It's not the same. I think Tocqueville would say, it's not really what I'm talking about, because you guys never even are in the same room, and your commitment to each other is, you like certain things, you write little AI generated comments cheering each other on. That's not what I'm talking about, right? So I think that's a big part of our problem. It's technology generated. These technologies bring many blessings, but there's a big cost to our society and our democracy, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think trying to work on how to change that as we go forward in the future, and what that might mean, and the importance of those institutions to raise individuals who are then going to frame technologies. And I think that's an interesting conversation I wanted to touch on here with you. I've been thinking about this idea of what the species will look like. I mean, your book is a lot about evolution, essentially, on the nation state, and how the democratic nation state might survive in the overall environment evolutionarily, and what are the things in those environments? What are the pressures? What are the et ceteras, right? That sort of impact its evolving. And I think about the species itself and how technologies and biotechnology and synthetic biology, AI, et cetera, will start to interweave us with our technology. We'll start to, we're already bringing back the direwolf. That's just the beginning. What does it look like? And I'm going, this is science fiction for now. You create synthetic wombs, and now you can make individuals, right? And so what's the value of the institution when we said we're unleashing Canada, we're unleashing the EU. Well, now are we unleashing essentially an amalgamation of the institution's ability to produce individuals that will then shape those technologies and then shape the DNA future of what we even look like as a species, and like what our technologies end up doing. And so I've been trying to wrap that into some futuristic view of how the nation state essentially impacts the character of this species, us, that can impact technologies at such a level that very soon, especially if general AI, artificial general intelligence comes in, it's going to be like an alien arrived. We're not going to recognize the powers that we have until it's too late if we don't get our institutions together now. But yeah, I would love your thoughts on all this sort of science fiction, near future kind of vision.
No, it's very speculative, but it's important. We need to speculate intelligently about these things. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, but I have. So here's one worry I have. AI, artificial intelligence, again, many efficiency gains. It's a blessing in many ways. As a college professor, I grapple with what to do with this thing. It's a tool my students, when they leave the classroom, when they graduate, many of them are going to find it in the workplace, right?
Yep.
It's just there. The boss wants something fast, got to use AI to get it done, be it writing an essay, writing a memo, or coding or something like that. So I'm very aware of that. I also am aware it's really easy to cheat with AI when you're writing a paper in a class. So easier than people my age can imagine. And so I can't pretend it's not there. How do I get my students to use it critically and recognize what it's good for and what it's not good for? One thing it's bad at is it can be a substitute for the early thinking you do when you're trying to write a speech or write a paper, write a memo, write an article. It can assemble thoughts into an outline, and then it can let you do the rest. But you've let AI short circuit a big part of what we used to consider the writing task, organizing those thoughts. It's hard. Even at my age, I don't like doing that. It's a pain, but I know it's important, and it's got to be my work, or it's right.
Yeah.
All right. So all that said, I am sure AI is going to go forward. We're not going to be able to put the brakes on it. Partly because of geopolitical competition. The United States is in a contest with China over AI. That's very clear to me.
Totally, yeah.
If you look at so I listened to a really interesting interview with Mark Andreessen, who's a venture capitalist. Andreessen Horowitz, backed a lot of Silicon Valley ventures. And he said, what he was asked by the interviewer, a guy called Ross Douth at New York Times was interviewing him, and he said, how come you Silicon Valley guys used to be for the Democrats, you've moved over to Trump and the Republicans, what's going on there? He said, well, because we're convinced that we are in a serious race with China, particularly on AI, on some other things, quantum computing and so on, but AI. We also became convinced that the Biden administration and the Democratic Party were trying to slow us down. Andreessen said, this is not just about me making a lot of money. This is about the national interest. Maybe he doesn't mean it. But I thought he sounded pretty serious, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
So what do we do with that, right? The United States can say, well, AI is dangerous. AGI, artificial general intelligence, looks like a really bad thing. So let's put the brake pedal on. But unless we get the Chinese to do the same, it doesn't matter, right? They're gonna chug along, and all right. What this means for the human race, I don't know. I also think, Andre, about this in terms of warfare, right?
Yeah.
There are, So AI has already been integrated into our war fighting, in target selection, in the advice it gives to commanders. There's a rustling in the leaves. Let's say you're in Ukraine, and there's a rustling in the thicket in front. Is that some Russian soldiers? Is it some Ukrainian civilians? Is it some animals? You got to make a call, because they could be dangerous or they could just be animals. AI, can help you figure that out. Probabilistically, it's Russian troops. Then AI can tell you what to do. Call in 3 drones, that'll do the trick, or whatever, right? This is happening apparently in real time, and this is only going to get bigger and bigger. So I worry about that. I worry about AI actually making targeting decisions, not just making estimates about where the enemy is and how powerful and what to do about it, but actually pulling the trigger. That seems to be unacceptable if you live in a democracy, but I'm not sure all countries would feel that way,
For sure.
That's one problem. And then there's a lot of, and this is getting into some of the science fiction, bioengineering, ways to actually alter the warfighter, the soldier, genetically, epigenetically, that worry me as well. And international competition drives a lot of this stuff. So without giving you any kind of definitive answer, I would just say some of the worries. I write a lot about China-U.S. competition as it relates to American democracy, but I have not larger, but other worries about this as well. That just as why do we have atomic weapons? Well, because in World War II, we, the Americans, believed with good reason that Nazi Germany was working on atomic weapons. They had some nuclear scientists. Some of them had defected and were over here, from the movie Oppenheimer. We know quite a bit about that.
Yeah.
And so we thought if they get the bomb first, game over, and it's going to be really bad. So we better get it first. It turns out the Nazis weren't working that fast on nuclear. We were wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. And now we're stuck with nuclear weapons. I'm afraid similar things are happening now. We're in this race with China over AI. We don't know how this is going to come out, and we don't even know what the world's going to look like. Whoever gets AI for, whoever wins the race, if I can talk in that sense.
Yeah.
What does that do to us? But it is something. we need to think hard about. And we're still a democracy. We can decide together, right? We don't have to have this dictated to us. So I think one reason to really cherish our institutions is the way they continue to empower us. If we can keep this system to argue about and figure out sane policies about technologies like AI. That's all I can say at this point, because I don't know enough, and nobody really knows where this is going.
Yeah.
Right? There are say, all kinds of scary, weird scenarios, and there are other people saying, no, this is just a tool to help us, to free us up to do other things, right? It's just a tool like any other technology. I tend to be more a worrywart on this, but we don't really know. But I do think this is one reason to cherish our democracy, because we can decide this together.
Yeah. Let us go forward together, says the man behind you.
Yeah, that's like Winston Churchill. Exactly. I do like that.
Yeah, you got Churchill behind you.
Exactly.
What made you put Churchill up there, by the way? Like, why was he such a revered figure for you?
Yeah, I really like, as you can tell, I like history. I think we can learn a lot from history. And Churchill was not perfect, and he made a lot of mistakes, especially in his younger years, but also his older ones. But he did, in a time when, I'll say, democracy was in probably its greatest trial, when it was facing Nazi Germany and fascism. He marshaled, as somebody said, he marshaled the English language and put it, sent it off to war. You know, his rhetoric, things like that, and he had even better ones than that, really rallied the British people and helped the Americans to start to say, we got a stake in this too. We have a dog in the fight. We can't just let Britain go down, or we might go down as well. I think that's really the first stirrings of America seeing itself as involved with the fate of democracy in other countries. Before that, a lot of Americans thought, no, that we've got nothing. The British, let them worry about it themselves. We fought a war against them 200 years ago. They'll sink or swim. We'll be fine. And in the 40s, a lot of Americans were saying, no, that's probably not the case. And Churchill makes a lot of sense, right? So he's one of the people I admire.
I mean, so what are those? How important are these institutions, bowling alleys, or governments and democracy, and courts, and all the various natures of the broad term of institution to the survival of a nation state, the flourishing of a nation state, as you see it on this sort of, in this evolutionary battle that the nation state goes through? I guess if you were going to configure it, that's a kind of a creative question for you. Like, how would you start? Which kind of values would you, institute? What kind of institutions would you want to, are most important?
Yeah.
Rule of law is obviously paramount for you. But I don't think we understand to what degree we're shaped by these things, and we let them go by the wayside at our own peril. Yeah. But I don't think that that's made apparent enough to people, especially in the flourishing of the nation.
Yeah. I think you're right. I'm not sure we've done a very good job. And, this is true of my guild as well, of really educating people about why institutions matter. So for a political scientist, the alternative to having institutions is arbitrary power. So things are going to get done one way or the other. And by arbitrary power, I mean one or more leaders just saying, do this or you get whacked. Do this or you go to prison. Do this or you get fined. And you have a very well-developed police apparatus with weapons, with coercive means that are very intrusive. So we've seen this in practice. Totalitarian, Stalin's Soviet Union, right? Stalin's Soviet Union. You get one thing you really dread in that society is the knock on the door at 11 p.m. because it's probably not your grandmother. And that's an alternative to having the institutions we've got. That's an extreme alternative, but it's where these countries typically go. And it's not just Stalin, Soviet. There are countries now that, Iran is a bit like that. China is a mild version, but this exists in China, Russia, right? Lots of countries. Mm-hmm. So alternatively, you have institutions. You allow people to self-organize, and the government follows certain rules. If the police are going to knock on your door at 11:30 and come and search, they have to have a warrant from a judge. They can't just do it because they don't like you, or the boss said, or the police chief said, go get them, right? Got to go through a different branch of government.
Yeah.
That's annoying, right? And it slows.
Especially if you just want to squash somebody.
Exactly.
Right?
But these are bad guys. Come on. But the price is well worth paying for a sustainable democracy. And I would say if we're going to live, a humane society recognizes the importance of human freedom and the ability of individuals and families and communities to self-organize and govern themselves, not unlimitedly. So certain things are out of bounds, right? So I come from the South, very difficult history there with civil rights. The federal government had to step in the 50s and 60s and change some things. I get that because the South had some very illiberal features, right? And the country's still far from perfect. But by and large, what we want to do is defer to localities and their ability to govern themselves. I think otherwise you really are departing from human freedom and human flourishing. You'll get some things in return. So if you live an obedient life, you obey the dictator, you might be okay, right? Mm-hmm. But you might not, right? There are just no guarantees in that kind of system. There's a play I've been thinking about a lot lately, Andre. It's called The Man for All Seasons, and it's based on it's this minister.
That sounds like a bad Tubi movie, but anyway.
Exactly. It's got the production values definitely are. I think it's from the 60s, but the movie version. It's based on a play, but anyway, it's about this Thomas More in the time of King Henry VIII of England, and he's for the rule of law, and he's worried. Henry is not much for the rule of law. Anyway, he's lecturing this other guy who's working for Henry, and he says, you don't understand. We need to kind of skirt the law to get the bad guys. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but Moore says, look, this country is thick with laws. You can't walk 5 feet without bumping into one of our laws. Like, that is irritating. And you would run over all the laws. If you're chasing the devil, you would run over all the laws to catch him. Once you've caught him and all those laws are gone, what's to prevent him from turning on you and going after you? Mm-hmm. Nothing. The law's gone.
The laws are gone.
That, I think, is what we need to think about. That really concentrates my mind. So that's why laws and institutions, as irritating, they slow us down. They need reform. They're not all good, right? I agree. Sometimes we need to get rid of them. We need to reform them. You bet. But that's what we do together as a democracy. And it should worry us all when those in power just hold the law in contempt and say, well, we know better.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting, because I think there's these political diatribes on either side of the same thing, right? It's interesting that people hold similar values and disagree on what's going on, right? Yeah. So, they take their case and so you have obviously President Trump and what happened to him as a candidate leading up. It feels like extreme lawfare and, it's not right. And then you see it happening across Europe. You see Marie Le Pen in France. Yeah. What's happened to her being taken out. Turkey, the oppositional leader in Turkey, just been taken out. And those things seem like coordinated from a singular source. I think it's interesting, due process on the case of the Venezuelan, but then there's also the amount of people that were let into the country that sort of gave that mandate, which was also really egregious in its own way, right? Where, you're forced to use taxpayer dollars to house people, put them up who've just arrived. That seems unusual and unprecedented as well.
Yeah.
But it's such a
I don't mean to absolve the Democrats or previous administrations of blame here, right? There's a reason. So I was talking to somebody actually earlier today about this. He said, but can't we think of Trump as a black swan, this rare event, and eventually he'll go away and everything will get back to the way it was before? And my answer was no, because there's a reason why Trump has won 2 elections and came close to winning a third in 2020. Did not win, but came close. Something's wrong, right? And
Yes.
I mean, and that's a really vague statement, but something wrong. He knows it. He has a really good instinct for kind of hitting people people who have this gut sense that something's wrong. He's a guy who can fix it. And part of what's wrong is pretty much everybody's been use the term lawfare. Pretty much everybody's been using the law. Congress started handing over power to the presidency a long time ago. I don't think Congress has really done its full legislating job for many years. We've had more and more executive orders in lieu of law. That's not just Trump. That's others. Yeah. Republican and Democrat. That's part of our problem. And so when I say rule of law, I don't mean let's get back to the way it was before Trump was elected. I think there was already a problem that he's sort of building on, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that problem is sort of instituted a little deeply. And so when you think about, I guess, flipping the page a little and going into your arrival here, just for people watching, thinking about this, you've won this amazing prize. It's about improving world order. It's a $100,000 prize. These are very prestigious awards that go out every year. Maybe you can talk about, what it meant to win this prize, and just your journey into, becoming this force of nature that, is so articulate on such a wide range of topics. And then maybe we flip back to, some geopolitical things after that. I don't know what kind of time you got.
Yeah. We can keep going. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Great.
Yeah. The prize was so I'd heard of the Grawemeyer Prize award. In fact, I remember it was 22 summers ago because I had recently turned 40. I'm dating myself.
What? Wait, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
You're not. Yeah. You look great.
I am. Well, thank you. You're a very kind man.
No, it's just I'm just saying it's like it is. No, it's true.
Well, appreciate it.
That number surprised me.
I'm gonna tell my kids you said that. So I was talking to this guy. We were at a conference. Anyway, there were these 2 historians. I'm not a historian, political scientist, but similar. One of them had won a Pulitzer Prize, and the other had won what the historians call the Bancroft Prize. Big deal, right? And I was in awe of these guys. So we're sitting around having a drink, and they said, "So, does political science have a prize like this?" And I said, "Well, there is this thing called the Grawemeyer," and they hadn't heard of it because they're historians, I guess. And I told them how much it paid, and one of them reared back. He said, "Well, that's almost worth." Changing your research agenda to try to get one of those.
Yeah.
And anyway, I haven't forgotten that little episode. I did not write this book gunning for a Grawemeyer. I just wrote it because I thought it was interesting and tackled some important questions. I'm so honored to have it. I was genuinely surprised. I got this email. So I knew I was one of 3 finalists. About a year ago, I got an email from maybe a little less than a year ago, email from the good people at University of Louisville. They're the ones who sponsor the thing and kind of administer it. And I thought, well, that's great, but there's no way. I told my wife, this is kind of a nice thing. I'll we'll tell the grandkids whenever we have them, and and then in I think November, I get this email from the head of the Grawemeyer Committee in Louisville, a guy called Charles Ziegler, great guy, saying, "Can we talk? Can you call me?" I thought, well, he's either a really nice guy who wants to let me down gently. You were really in contention till the last minute, or I've got this award. I wouldn't allow myself to believe I'd won it. I thought he's probably just a nice guy. So I called him, and and sure enough, I got it. So. And I was just out in Louisville 2 weeks ago to get the prize, and I gave a couple of lectures, and there was a banquet. They were just very warm people, and it's clear, this is a rigorous process. I used to evaluate books for this prize, so
really,
yeah, and I'm sure they're going to ask me to do it again now that I've
wow.
Yeah. So it's a big deal. And it's an honor. A couple of my mentors in grad school way back won this award. Samuel Huntington, Robert Cohan won it. A lot of other people I admire enormously. So I think, what am I doing in this company? But I'm so happy to be there. And I would just say it's just one of these nice things that happen if you follow, if you do what you think matters and work hard at it, and follow your conscience, do what you think is important. There's no guarantee, but sometimes nice things like this happen. And I think that's my story. It's just, I did something I thought was important, and lo and behold, they noticed, and there we are. So, but I'm very grateful to those folks for picking the book.
So maybe we can talk about why you felt it was important. What about this work that you feel was so compelling for you at the time that this was what you needed to focus on? It's such an awesome. I mean, I like it because I think of the evolutionary framework all the time and whatnot. But yeah, I would love to just hear about that motivation that got you on this journey.
Yeah. So I do study international relations. I don't first and foremost study American democracy or democracy in general, but I've always been interested in how democracy affects international relations, right? So democracies are different in some ways. They don't fight wars against one another. I wrote about that years ago. Funny enough, democracies do fight wars quite a lot, just not against each other. And that's a kind of a strange fact. It is not true of communist countries, of monarchies, of fascists. They all fought each other, not democracy. So I know democracy does matter, and there's some other ways it matters. But a couple of things happened. I'm going to say about 10 years ago. I had a sabbatical. I was over in Germany, in Berlin, wonderful place.
Oh, I did my study abroad there.
Is that no kidding?
Yeah.
Where were you?
It was Humboldt University.
Yes, I know Humboldt. Well, I had a Humboldt fellowship there.
Oh, wow.
Which was great, which is not actually connected to the university, but it's the same guy, I guess, Alexander Humboldt. So,
yeah.
Friend of Thomas.
That was awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, great place. And a couple of things. First of all, I got very interested in evolution as applied by social scientists to what we do over in the social. So evolution comes out of biology and some philosophy, but they're economists, they're anthropologists, they're sociologists, political scientists who use it, psychologists. I just started to read how they do it. What do they borrow from evolutionary theory? And I just was reading a ton of this, and I think this really can help us understand how international institutions shape countries. Think of institutions as the environment, analogous to the environment around a species or a population of organisms, right? And it selects for certain traits. I really was grabbed by this idea. I was also grabbed by the idea, which some biologists call niche construction, and it's a similar idea, ecosystem engineering, which is when you have a species, an organism, shape the environment, even as the environment shapes it. So you have this back and forth, because I thought, well, that's sort of what the United States does with its environment. It tries to shape the environment while the environment also shapes it. So
like your beaver example there?
Precisely, yes.
Yeah.
The beaver story, I can tell this in 30 seconds.
Take as long as you want. I mean, it's long form, man. Yeah, that's the beauty. I'm so glad to see you in long form.
Okay,
I'm still all these short form, podcasts and interviews. They're like, you got 30 seconds, go. I'm like,
right. Well, I know you're gonna have to edit some of this, I'm sure, but.
Oh yeah, no.
So the story is, beaver. Why do we have long-toothed beavers? Well, the story you often hear, it's just what we call a just so story. Nobody saw this happen, right? But the idea, Darwinian theory would say something like this, that you once had short-toothed beavers, long teeth are a mutation. Why did long-toothed beavers come to predominate? Because it's the long-toothed beavers, not the short-toothed, that can chop down trees and build dams. That helps them trap food, maybe evade predators. So the long-toothed beavers have a survival and a reproductive advantage over the short tooth. They get eaten less, and they eat better, and they get eaten less. So over generations, they're going to the short tooth are going to die off, and the long tooth will come to dominate. All right, so that's the environment selecting for. However, notice what's happening in the story. Beavers, the long tooth beavers, are not passively accepting what the environment throws at them. They are shaping the environment. They're chopping down trees and building dams. Mm-hmm. So they are thereby steering evolution in a different direction than it otherwise would have gone. If they hadn't chopped down those trees, they would have no advantage over the short-toothed beavers, as far as we know.
That's right. Yeah.
So they're active in their own evolution, okay? That's kind of like what great powers like the United States or today China do. They, like beavers chopping down trees, they are manipulating the environment to favor themselves and their interests, right? Mm-hmm. I was really grabbed by this. I didn't think anybody had ever drawn this.
Such a great idea.
So that's what I've done with that. The other thing that was happening, Andre, is this is 2015, 2016. And I had been concerned about our country's democracy for a while. I was in Germany, where German democracy was also experiencing it was wobbling a bit. 2015 was a year in which the Angela Merkel, the chancellor at that point, admitted 800,000 refugees. And she had her reasons, and it was a very kind humanitarian thing to do. But that's a lot of people in a country of 80 million. 800,000 is a lot of people for the infrastructure in 1 year. Wow. And so there were people wondering, first of all, this doesn't seem like a fully democratic decision, but also what's it going to do to our society? So I was just thinking very hard about the travails of these pretty wealthy democracies. We all have a lot of money, a lot of resources, but we're encountering some trouble. Some of it seems a bit self-inflicted, but what's going on that's causing this to happen to all these democracies at the same time? So all this stuff began to come together in my head that maybe I should think about environmental, the social environment in which countries operate in the same way that biologists think about the natural environment in which species operate, and see if I can figure out if the international environment is no longer selecting for democracy. Is it selecting for authoritarianism, or might it come to do so soon? So that really has been the controlling idea for me ever since. Can we kind of figure that out? How would we figure it out? How would we know? So that's how I came to. I only wrote the book later. I wrote it during the pandemic. Lockdown. You can do a lot in lockdown if you put your mind to it. So I wrote.
Yeah.
My wife and I. My wife's from Canada. We were in Vancouver for 13 months, and I had another sabbatical, and we were there. And I just hunkered down and wrote a draft of the book, sent it off to the press. They accepted it. They wanted a few changes. Russia invaded Ukraine after that, and they said you need to write a chapter about Russia.
Yep.
I said, really? I said, yeah, really. Okay, so I wrote. And I was glad they were correct about that. So I put some material about Russia in there because they're a player as well. And that's the story. So it took a while to put it all together, but it really came from some concern, some intellectual interest I had in evolution and coevolution, and some real concerns I had as a citizen about our democracy and whether I, as someone who specializes in foreign policy and international relations, can bring something to the table. Because I have a lot of colleagues who write about American democracy just as a domestic matter. What's wrong with our party system? What's wrong with our culture? All that's valid, completely valid.
Naturally.
But I'm taking an outside-in view. There's some things going on in the world that are also affecting our democracy.
Yeah, especially when you see trends across different nations that are happening simultaneously. Yeah. All of a sudden, you have to, do cross-nation analysis.
That's right.
Right, and so I guess what did you find? Yeah, you found open liberalism.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's right.
And a lot of
distance.
How do you differentiate that from just woke? This term that's been thrown around. It sounds like it has some of those same tenets, but I haven't quite. How do you separate it from woke? Open liberalism from woke.
Yeah. I think open liberalism is pretty much bipartisan. So different. The left will emphasize different features of it from the right. So the left, especially lately, emphasize some of the cultural features, which you can shorthand woke, sure. But there's also an economic aspect that really comes out of, the Republican part, the Reagan revolution, so called in the 80s, which is about, and it's ironic, right? Because you can say, look, left and right, these are very different sources. What are you talking about? Reagan revolution and wokeness. Well, what they have in common is, and I'm not the first to say this, but there's some other writers who've identified this. A guy called Mark Lilla, who I think is really good on this point. They both are about, as I said a few minutes ago, removing barriers, both physical and cultural, psychological, to the individual being whatever he or she or they want to be. Again, what's not to like about that, right? This seems to be what we mean by freedom. But I'm just saying it hasn't always been what we meant fully, and there's some social costs. And there are a lot of people who don't thrive under this system. And so I really think it's been a bipartisan problem. That's what's made it so powerful and so difficult. And I'd even say, I think I've been pretty clear about my own political sympathies right now, but you can argue it would take a big disruptor to change this, to get us to rethink this system. We've got the disruptor. I myself don't agree with what the disruptor's doing, but it's been a big, hard problem. And a lot of people felt there's no way out. How do we get out of this? They don't even know what the problem is, but they know there's no out. So we put ourselves in this situation, I think.
So are we tying a relationship between open trade, say, vis-a-vis non-tariffs, and adding China into the World Trade Organization, mixed with what we saw with the border policy, with open reducing of barriers, everyone can come in, mixed with what we're seeing at the level of even letting children decide their gender and not having to tell the parents, because we are so sure that we're in the right of taking away whatever traditional values they walked in with and giving them this openness to make themselves in whatever image they want. Open liberalism. I'm trying to sort of pull into some of these strings, but I think that's sort of those connections.
No, that's very astute. Yeah, I think so. So I know people would say, no, that's crazy. These things have nothing to do with each other. But I think there's a certain type of argument that's just a winning. You don't even have to make the argument. If you can argue that, no, personal freedom means removal of barriers. You get to decide who you are, when. You even get to decide when and how you die, because, assisted suicide, north of the border in Canada, this has become normal, right? Everything, you get to decide everything. All the time. And again, I don't object to that per se. I object to the pressure to become the sort of person who has to keep deciding everything, who has to live a fluid life. I think there's a kind of a paradoxical unfreedom that lies with that. So I would say, So what does it have in common when our schools say, the 7-year-old decides their gender and we don't have to tell the parents, with completely letting China in the WTO? Well, on the surface, nothing. Those are completely unrelated. But the arguments in favor do have to do with getting rid of what you call legacy boundaries, right? Be they national boundaries, be they personal, traditional, cultural boundaries, what religious boundaries, whatever. Get rid of them all. And this is if you look back at the rhetoric of the 1960s, this is very much what a lot of the counterculture, and even I was a little kid back then, I don't remember it, but counterculture,
like the hippies,
was really about.
Is that a derogatory term?
What's that?
Is that a derogatory term?
What was the term?
Hippies.
Yeah, it was in my household. Yes.
Really?
Now it's a sort of a joke. Hippies, those old guys with the gray ponytails, but
but when you say counterculture, that's
exactly.
Or are you civil rights was kind of counter? I mean, is it counter Vietnam, et cetera, right? Like
right. No, it's a complicated story. I am talking about the hippie counterculture, where it really, determined And by the way, I always try to get into the inner logic of these movements and cultures and generate some sympathy. So I can understand the deep desire for nonconformity in the 60s, although I don't remember it. I was a little kid. So it's not that this was this thoroughly evil thing that shouldn't have happened. It's just something that happened in history. We need to recognize it for what it did, the good it brought, but also the cost it's imposed on us. I think this is one of the costs that we now, it's as though our institutions, our culture impose, countercultural values on everyone, even people who don't want them, who don't flourish under those values. I mean, so here's a little example. I think this is on point. There's this public radio host entertainer called Garrison Keillor. He was canceled a few years ago, and this is not about his cancellation. It was something he wrote in the newspaper years ago, and maybe it was a commencement address he gave. That's right, it was a commencement address he gave, and he said, Garrison Keillor, Keillor, and he said, and on the one level I liked what he said, but then I began to think about it and didn't like it so much. He said, I was when I was a kid, I was raised in a very strict household, and something like this, Andre. I'm gonna have to paraphrase. And I was walking to school one day, and I wasn't allowed to smoke, and had to get to school on time. And I decided, you know what, today I'm gonna have a cigarette, and be late to school. And it's part of my growing up. And my advice to you is, to the graduates, have that cigarette, play hooky. And I thought, all right, easy for Mr. Upper Middle Class to say. But there are a lot of people in this country who do not need to hear that advice.
I hear that.
Right? So the advice he's giving is one of someone in a very privileged position for whom the consequences of playing hooky are pretty minimal. He'll be all right. For a lot of people, the consequences are pretty severe. So that's the kind of thing, come on, we can all live this fluid life and do what we want whenever we want. And it's just about personal emancipation and being all you can be. But for some people, it's not. It's really going to lead to trouble. And some people, at least for certain periods of their life, want some order.
Yeah.
Right. Want community to check behind them. Right.
Yeah.
So I think Garrison Keillor, and again, I'm a fan in some ways. He's a great storyteller, but in that moment, I realized there is something odd about this.
Yeah,
this is not universal advice. He thinks this is general advice anybody should take. It's not. It's about a particular group of elite people.
Yeah, and it impacts so many levers, and like you say, some individuals don't flourish under it, even though they're being pushed towards it.
Yeah.
It somehow has led me to be thinking about OnlyFans and, women making a proclamation of sleeping with 1,000 guys in a day and becoming famous for it and becoming not revered, but not revered, if that makes any sense. Like perhaps hated on one end, but also getting a lot of, admiration. And it's not good advice for everybody. Maybe some people can flourish under that.
Let's not universalize that one. No.
Right. And so, and that's become so, the perverse nature of all of that has become, it's become easier for people. It's desensitized from people. Right. So it doesn't even seem as perverse as it would of 20 years ago.
Right.
Right. It's it's become normalized to such an extent.
Right.
And it can quickly, it reminds me to some degree, we talked about Berlin, the story they talked about in the rise of Hitler in the 1920s in Berlin, of the, open sex, the brothels that were everywhere, et cetera, and how easy it was to relate to order in those times.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately for the other side, when you want to start tending yourself back to order, it sort of becomes like a far-reaching proclamation of all the worst examples in the past of when order came back. Oh, this is Hitler again.
Right.
Oh, this is this. And it's just a conflation.
Yeah.
Just because we're saying, hey, maybe everybody doesn't need to, move to LA and abandon all their values. They perhaps could stay around their community they grew up in. That's not a bad thing. And
right.
it's great for the nation. We need both sides, and we could come to appreciate each other in a deeper way instead of it creating a divide. But it seems now the big divide politically is between people who went to college and people who haven't.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it is interesting. I mean, and thinking about that time, you did mention that you were young back then. What was your upbringing like, and how did you end up becoming this massive professor here at the University of Virginia, very distinguished university?
Well, I grew up not too far from here, Raleigh, North Carolina, my hometown, and my father was a Methodist pastor, actually. So grew up in a pretty strict, I mean, very loving parents, very positive. You know, my dad was a lot of fun, but he was a pretty serious guy, very, very serious Christian. And so that's the environment I grew up in. Went to public schools, and, you know, suburban upbringing, middle class, upper middle class, played football in the neighborhood as a kid, basketball, whatever sport was in season, we would do. Didn't think I would be an academic. I didn't know what I wanted to do. You know, had a lot of different ideas. I thought I might become a diplomat when I got older, like, you know, Secretary of State or something like that. So backed into academia, just decided believe it or not, I started to like school when I got older and thought, I just want to keep going with this. Graduate school, yeah. I got interested in international relations when I was in college in particular. So I guess a key moment was in college. I had the great privilege of being a research assistant for a professor, and he went to Vienna, to Austria, not so far from Berlin. And I was his research assistant, and it was at a think tank that had this is during the Cold War, 1984.
Whoa, what a perfect year for that, huh?
Seriously. Had all these scientists from what we then called the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia and Poland, that I was getting to know these people, you know, people back home in North Carolina. I went to Duke, and Duke's a great place, but, you know, this is a new environment for me over in Vienna. And I began to think, I'm really interested in how we're interacting. All these, you know, we're individuals. A lot of us like each other, but there are certain barriers. This is the Cold War, right? So we had a discussion group. Some of the Russian kids got a discussion group going on foreign policy. And we went to one of their apartments one night. I remember this is fall of 1984. And there were some Americans and some Europeans and some Russians. And we're all students. Very cool. So the Americans went first, and we said, okay, we just want you to know that we have some criticisms of our country's, you know, we love our country. We have some criticisms, like the Vietnam War we think was not the right thing, or it wasn't well fought. We did some pretty bad things there. It's just sort of an opening move. And I remember the Russians, they were kind of nervous, and one of them said, well, and by the way, Soviet troops were in Afghanistan at the time.
Okay.
It's often called the Soviets' Vietnam. It was not going well.
Okay.
So I think we kind of expected them to say, yeah, we feel similarly about Afghanistan. But instead, only one of them said, we have no comment on our country's foreign policy. And that was it. And I realized this is kind of sad, because I like these people. I connect with them on a human level. You know, we go out for beers together, whatever. They can't do what we just did. They can't. And I thought, it's sad, but it's also interesting. And they probably thought one of the people in that room might have been what you call a commissar, like checking up on them to make sure they didn't, you know. Mm-hmm. And that really stayed with me. And I thought, I really should study, kind of figure out what's going on here. How can international politics affect personal relationships to that extent? I'd never really thought about that before. So years later, I went to grad school and got the PhD, and then, you know, it was off to the races. But so that was key. It was a real privilege I had to go to Austria as an undergraduate, and, you know, I don't take that for granted. It's a great experience, and it kind of launched me into what I later did. So, yeah.
Wow, that's really profound to hear, and just like to think about the fact that they didn't have that ability to speak freely, and they knew it. Even if it felt safe, they were probably self-censoring regardless. And
right.
I mean, what a stagnation on society in the long run.
That's right.
How do you feel about the current space of, free speech in our country.
Yeah.
And the ability to speak freely on a variety of topics.
Yes.
You know, yeah. What do you think about the current state?
Yeah, Andre, I've been concerned for a while, and here's again, I think there's a bipartisan problem. I think it's so I'm one of the people who's worked on my campus to just make sure we preserve academic freedom, where people. I really don't like self-censorship. Sure, self-censorship in the sense of being polite and civil, not name calling, not appealing to ethnic or racial or religious stereotypes. That just gets in the way of discussion. It belittles people. It makes people think they don't belong. Right? It's bullying. I get all that, but on a lot of campuses in recent years, it's been taken too far, so that people have to think. If I say this, if I say what I really think, somebody might put this on Instagram, and tonight at the dining hall, I'm going to get raked over the coals, or people won't want to talk to me, or whatever.
Yeah, cancel culture.
That's messy. Yeah, exactly. Cancel culture. As a professor, I can't tolerate that. I think that's interfering with my ability to educate. If my students can't speak their mind, can't say. So if I have a student who is a big fan of Donald Trump, I want them to say it. I want them to defend it. And if somebody hates Donald Trump, I also want them to defend that. They have to, defend what, say what you think, but defend it, and we're good. Disagree with me, defend it, and we're good. I've been afraid that universities are getting away from that. Some, not all. UVA's been pretty good, others not so good. Now I am concerned about so that's mostly a threat from the left, the woke left. Now I'm very concerned about from the administration, what's going on, trying to basically take over the way Harvard and Columbia do their hiring and promotion and so on. I understand these places have had big problems, as I've just been saying. The solution cannot be a federal takeover, even temporary. That is not how this country's ever operated. Even in public universities like the one where I teach, the government needs to take a hands-off approach for these places to educate, within limits. So when there's anti-Semitism or racism, civil rights are being violated, of course. But, particular words or canceling particular speakers or whatever, that's just been a big mess. So, I worry about trying to when a scalpel is needed to solve a problem, the administration's using a sledgehammer, and it's going to do a lot of damage.
You see something like speaking of the deportation situation, you see something like that with people who've had negative opinions about Israel and the way that they're conducting the war, and then they've been deported.
Yeah.
And the rationale as well, if you would have said that at your entry, we would have kicked you out then.
Right.
We would have never let you in. So it's a valid thing to sort of somewhat retroactively, right? That's another thing, is that they're looking for what you said in the past in order to find you. That seems like it might have a chilling effect on what people want to say, especially when we talk about, like, once again, the value of our institutions on the world stage. I mean, we think in the moment that it's going to be a solve, but it might just chill people from wanting to bring their talents here.
Yes. And
we're doing a pretty poor job of bringing up our own K through 12 across the nation.
Right.
And so, we're not leaning, but, like our capacity to, even as we talk about tariffs and competing with China, our capacity for advanced technologies and the amount of talent that we have in these spaces could be much, much more, especially with the talent pool that we have, but we're not able to create them. So we're bringing in a lot of people who qualify greatly from other nations, which is awesome, which I think we should do, which our institutions have probably done for a long time. I don't know how far back it goes.
Yeah,
but
a pretty long time, yeah.
You want to go there and, say what you got to say, like you said, create this atmosphere. They talk about comedians being the space where you are able to say what you want. You're a comedian. Yeah. You got to be able to say things that are harsh. If people don't like it, they just won't laugh, and you keep on going. And I think we should look, we do to some degree, but our colleges are the same, right? Young people go to these places to be comedians, to say what they want to say, but to think deeper than comedians ought to.
I hope so.
but to be able to speak freely
Yeah.
about anything they feel and have that challenge and understand how to make logical and rational arguments,
Yeah.
and to grow. And so it is interesting to see that.
Yeah.
I do want to, Lynn, I don't know if you got anything else on that first.
Well, one little story. Back in Berlin, since you were there, I remember. So it's 2015 or 2016. I'm at lunch with some. They're younger than me, postdocs, but young scholars, and they're talking about immigration. One of them says, and this is back when Facebook was cooler. I guess Facebook's not so cool anymore, but one of them said, I have this Facebook group, and one of the women is saying we shouldn't have let so many immigrants into Germany. And she goes, I don't know if I want her to be in our group anymore. Like it just makes me, it's kind of yucky. And the others agree that, yeah, maybe you shouldn't talk to her anymore. I said, well, hang on. So I'm the outsider here, but what are you going to accomplish if you freeze this person out? Because she's got these ideas. Don't you think it's better to talk to her about it? And if you don't, the ideas are just going to go underground. They're not going to go away. They're going to go underground, and they might come out in a very bad place. And they kind of took the point, but I could tell they weren't going to. I'm the outsider, right?
Yeah.
So I think one reason why this is kind of backing up what you were saying, we need to be able to speak our minds. And again, I always insist, back yourself up. Don't just tell me what you think and then let it line. Expect me to say, yeah, that's cool. Whatever you think, fine. It may not be fine, but do say it. And I might learn something too. Even the old professor might learn something from his student. I actually do. A student corrected me on something just last week, and I thanked him. I didn't know that. That's great. If we don't do that, it's not education. I don't know it's indoctrination or something, but it is not education, and I don't want any part of it. So I'm pretty adamant about that.
Yeah, I guess since we're wrapping up, and I just mentioned Israel, there's Gaza. We didn't get enough geopolitical things.
No,
there's obviously Ukraine. But yeah, I guess briefly on that note, what do we take from what's happening there? How do you assess that on a geopolitical front? In a sense, the way that the war is being conducted has created such a backlash, and it could create a potential pariah status. We've already got, genocide reports from certain, publications that are, well regarded, B'Tselem, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. On the flip side, you have, Iran that's literally, having a more expansionist sort of posturing when you think about Hezbollah, you think about the Houthis, you think about who they're funding and how that looks. It becomes such a litmus test or a Rorschach's, depending on how you see it kind of thing. And so I just wanted to have you touch on that while we still have you on.
The hardest problem in the world. Thank you. We're here at the end.
Sorry to.
One of the hardest, maybe the hardest.
Sure.
So complicated. Look, it's been enormously costly. First of all, the human cost is staggering to Palestinians and also a lot of Lebanese but the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank have suffered enormously. They live under both the West Bank Palestinian Authority, but even more Hamas in Gaza they're not democracies. And Hamas is really hardcore authoritarian, theocratic. And so we need to have sympathy for the ordinary Palestinians who live under and have been crushed by the Israeli retaliation. On the other hand, we have to recognize just how heinous that October 2023 attack by Hamas was. It was truly horrible. And I was horrified at the way, some people were cheering for it. Like there's just desire for vengeance against innocent civilians. So it's very ugly, just very ugly what's happened. Israel has had a lot of military success, has weakened Iran. You're right about Iran's proxies, but Hezbollah's been weakened. Hamas has been weakened. The Assad government's been overthrown. So Iran's really kind of on the back foot. They're going to try to come back, but
probably why they're at the negotiation table right now.
Exactly. That's right. I think I was hoping one silver lining, one nice thing the Trump administration could do is kind of restart the Abraham Accords so that Saudi Arabia would get deeply involved in this problem and offer money and its good offices to help broker a negotiation. Now that other Gulf monarchies are involved in this, right? But I really thought the Saudis could and should get involved in a way that other regional actors could not, because the United States is so suspect in the eyes of Palestinians and other Arabs. 100%. It's not that Saudi Arabia is regarded as beloved of all Arabs either, but it's a, it's a regional power, and it has a lot of capital, both social and material capital. I'm not seeing much of that. I think the Trump people maybe took Saudi Arabia for granted, and I'm not seeing a lot of action on this front yet. But I'm hoping. Other than that, I don't see a great way forward right now. Israel's determined to destroy Hamas. Hamas is not going easy. So, and I get it. Hamas is horrible. And people kid themselves who think, oh, you can work with these guys. They've just been pushed to the wall. You can work with other Palestinian authorities, yes, but I think Hamas is out of bounds. But what goes in its place? It is not up to the United States to say. It is not up to Israel to say what goes in its place in Gaza. Israel does not want to run Gaza permanently. Certainly, you saw that AI-generated video maybe a few weeks ago of Trump Gaza.
Maybe. The resorts and the
golden statue of Trump.
Yeah,
so that's crazy. That's
Trump hotels, and
that just shows how ridiculous.
Which starts with ethnic cleansing, but yeah, that's secondary, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just shows how unserious it is for the idea of the United States to do this. But Israel also can't do it without ethnic cleansing, and heaven forbid, right? I think I like to think most Israelis don't want to go there, right? They just want to defeat Hamas. So I really think regional actors and the Saudis and the other Gulf monarchies are the only actors with a realistic chance of bringing them. So I'm hoping for that. And I'm hoping the Trump people really can, maybe Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz can facilitate that. The sooner the better. Otherwise, I'm really stumped and not in despair, but quite pessimistic about the short to medium term there. I think it's, I don't see it getting better. So.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, I'd love to speak more. I know, you got to run. I mean, we didn't get into Hegseth and what he's got going on right now. That's in the news today. And the sort of inner politics between the cabinet and what's happening with certain factions inside of the Trump presidency. What's going on with Ukraine? What's going on with Russia, with the minerals, and all these various geopolitical things that is really your bread and butter. But I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the thesis of the book, talking about what, brought you here. Is there anything else you want to leave and, with your last, before you have to head off, and maybe, that you want to leave with the audience?
Well, just to say, I'm grateful to you, Andre, for the opportunity to talk. And this national championship radio it's very intriguing to me, the way you bring people on from very different fields and who've done different sorts of things. But I want to encourage you in what you're doing, and encourage your listeners that, we're still the land of opportunity. There's a lot you can do here. Don't despair. And our system of self-government is real, and it's worth defending. It really is worth defending. So we just have to do it smartly, figure out our role as individuals and as groups. So good.
I like to say this right here,
There you go.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Or exactly. Or let us go forward together. Yeah.
Let us go forward together, Exactly. So thank you so much, Dr. Owen, John. Thank you. And we'll be talking soon, talk about the episode. But thanks again for joining us on National Champion Radio.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Andre.